Hey guys, tonight we slip into a place you probably don't want to visit. But here we go anyway, the snow-choked foxholes of the Eastern Front. It's winter. 1941, and you're a German soldier huddled deep in the earth, wrapped in a threadbare coat that never seems thick enough. Frost creeps up the walls of your dugout like white ivy. Your breath curls in the air, only to freeze on the inside rim of your helmet. The ground beneath you is so solid with ice that even lying down feels like resting against polished marble. You try not to close your eyes, but they grow heavier by the minute. The cold isn't the worst enemy out here, sleep is. And if you give in to that silky whisper that says, just rest for a moment, well, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Snow presses down on the forest like an uninvited guest that refuses to leave. The Russian winter has a way of silencing everything, muffling even the echoes of artillery far off to the east. You tug your blanket tighter, though it's more holes than wool. Your boots, stiff with frost, are little more than 2 blocks of wood strapped to your feet. The trench is shallow, barely waist high, and the wind whips through it like you built it just to guide the cold straight to your bones. Sleep is always hovering nearby, teasing you. You imagine your mother's bed back home, feather mattress, heavy quilts, maybe even the ticking of the clock in the hallway. But here, that fantasy is a trap. If you nod off, even for half an hour, the cold will creep inside your lungs and claim you. Soldiers in your company already learned that the hard way. 1 minute, they're curled against the trench wall. The next, they're statues, eyes open, snow frosting their lashes. You press your teeth together, trying to hold back the yawn that threatens to undo you. It's funny, your greatest danger isn't the Red Army tonight. It's the temptation of rest. Historians later would argue that more men on the Eastern Front were taken by exposure and exhaustion than bullets in those first winters. Numbers blur depending on the source, but one consistent fact remains: the German army underestimated just how lethal fatigue could be. Your sergeant walks by, muttering, boots crunching on frozen earth. He glances at you, sees your drooping eyes, and doesn't need to say a word. The message is clear. If you fall asleep on watch, the entire squad could be dead by dawn. It's a simple equation: your wakefulness equals survival, your exhaustion equals disaster, and so begins the battle within the battle. You tap your face with numb fingers, but the skin feels like someone else's. You stomp your boots, trying to keep blood moving, but the leather is so stiff that the sound is more like cracking firewood. One soldier beside you mutters about walking into no man's land just to get shot better than freezing here. Another swears he sees sparks of light in the snow. Little hallucinations born of exhaustion. It's odd to think about, but modern sleep scientists now say a soldier deprived of rest for 3 nights starts to drift into microdreams. Fragments of visions slipping in even with open eyes. Maybe that's what's happening to you. You think you hear a piano. Absurd, but the notes seem to hang in the icy air. You blink, and it's gone, just the rattle of your own teeth chattering to stay awake. You talk to yourself, quiet at first, then louder, until your trench mate nudges you, muttering for you to shut up. You laugh under your breath. It's either that or lose your mind. Humor becomes a kind of shield, thin as paper, but better than nothing. One guy cracks a joke about being so cold his lice packed up and moved south for the winter. Another swears his frostbitten toes tried to desert. The trench erupts in muffled laughter, and for a moment, the ice feels lighter. The biting practice hasn't begun yet, not tonight. That comes later, when fatigue grows unbearable, and jokes can't carry the weight anymore. For now, you cling to any trick you can think of, rubbing your eyes until they burn, singing old marching songs under your breath, even pinching your own arm hard enough to leave bruises. None of it works for long. The cold has patience. It waits back home. You remember your grandfather telling stories of farmers staying awake through harvest nights by chewing on raw onions or slapping themselves. You scoffed at the time, but now you'd give anything for an onion, just to taste something sharp enough to shock your body awake. Folk remedies had their logic. Perhaps every culture had its tricks: coffee, tobacco, even prayer. But here, deep in Russia, stripped of comforts, you're left with only the simplest of instincts: move, chatter, shake, repeat. The absurdity isn't lost on you. You came here trained to fight a modern war panzers, automatic rifles, radios, and now survival depends on ancient habits, like stamping your feet or humming lullabies in reverse to trick your own mind. You think, if historians ever look back, will they laugh at this? Or will they see it as proof that in the end, war isn't about machines, it's about human bodies struggling to resist collapse? That's the debate, really. Some scholars claim German planning simply failed to account for climate. Others insist the men themselves exaggerated tales of sleep deprivation later to make sense of the horror. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But as you sit here, cheeks burning with frost, you don't feel like exaggerating. You feel like closing your eyes, and you know if you do, you may never open them again. You rub your temples, glance at the dark horizon. Somewhere beyond, the Red Army sleeps, or perhaps they too are locked in this same struggle against fatigue. Maybe across no man's land, another soldier stamps his feet, muttering the same curses, blinking against the same seductive weight of slumber. In that thought, oddly enough, there's comfort. The enemy might be as weary as you are. The war pauses for no one, but fatigue is universal. So you bite your lip. Not hard, not yet, just enough to sting, enough to remind yourself you're alive. The taste of iron creeps onto your tongue. Strange how a little pain feels like salvation. The night drags on, hour after frozen hour. You wish for dawn, though dawn brings artillery, and artillery brings death. Still, even the thunder of shells would be better than this quiet battle with your own eyelids. You sigh, leaning forward on your rifle, and whisper to yourself that tomorrow has to be easier. But you know it won't. The enemy out here isn't always a man with a rifle. It's the whisper in your own head that says, just close your eyes. That whisper grows louder than the crack of a distant machine gun, louder than the moan of the icy wind that scours the treetops. You discover very quickly that fatigue is not a background nuisance, not a thing to shrug off with a laugh and a cigarette. No, fatigue is a hunter, patient and relentless, creeping in with the same determination as any Soviet patrol. You fight it with every trick you know, but it keeps circling back, teeth bared, waiting for you to stumble. Your eyelids betray you first. They sink and flutter despite your best efforts, as if someone attached lead weights to them. You jerk awake, glance at your watch, and realize mere minutes have passed since the last time you checked. A comrade beside you groans, nods off mid-sentence, and for a moment you envy him until you remember that in this cold, sleep is a gamble you rarely win. Soldiers who drift off in foxholes often never wake. That thought alone makes you stand up, knees trembling, stamping your boots in the frozen trench floor. You slap your cheeks until they sting red. The sound is almost comical, but you don't care. Anything is better than surrendering to the velvet grip of drowsiness. One soldier mutters that fatigue here is deadlier than Soviet snipers, and you believe him. The sniper waits for an opening, but sleep is always waiting, hour after hour, without fail. Fatigue plays cruel tricks on the mind. You catch yourself staring at nothing for minutes, convinced you've seen a figure moving across the snow, only for the vision to dissolve into a shadow of your imagination. Another soldier swears he saw a line of wagons rolling down the horizon, wagons that vanish like smoke when you blink. Hallucinations born from exhaustion and cold. Modern scientists might explain it with words like REM, rebound, and sleep deprivation, psychosis. But back then, you only knew one word: madness. So men come up with tricks, endless tricks. You see one soldier dig his nails into his palm until blood wells up, just enough to sting him awake. Another whispers multiplication tables under his breath, reciting them like prayers. Yet another starts humming an old drinking song so loud he earns a slap from his neighbor. There's a kind of camaraderie in it, the grim humor that soldiers find even in the most miserable conditions. One guy quips, "At least the Russians don't have to fire a shot. We'll all drop dead from yawning before spring." You chuckle despite yourself, because it feels like he's right. And here's the curious part. German medical officers wrote endless reports on fatigue during the early stages of the Russian campaign, warning that sleeplessness was grinding men down faster than bullets. Some historians argue those reports were exaggerated, written by officers desperate to explain why units were failing. Others believe they underestimated the scale entirely, brushing off exhaustion as a matter of discipline rather than survival. The truth? Well, it's probably somewhere in between. History often hides in those gray zones. Night stretches on endlessly. The Eastern Front has a way of bending time. Minutes stretch into hours, hours into lifetimes. You think about home, not battles, not orders, just home. The warmth of the stove in your parents' kitchen, the smell of bread, the clatter of dishes. Sleep teases you with those memories, offering them like bait, and you nearly take it, nearly sink into the dream, until a nearby soldier suddenly jolts awake, cursing, realizing he nodded off. His face is pale, lips tinged blue, and he shivers violently, as if death brushed past him and moved on. That vision slams the lesson into you all over again. Here, sleep equals surrender. By now your body has stopped asking politely for rest, it demands it. Your arms feel heavier, as though carrying invisible weights. Even lifting your rifle to shift it against your shoulder takes effort. Your legs ache from standing and stamping, but the moment you crouch, you risk drifting off. There's no winning with fatigue. You only barter with it, minute by minute. Oddly, the cold helps as much as it hurts. The icy sting on your skin is a natural alarm clock, each gust of wind like a slap. Some men even expose their fingers or ears briefly, just to jolt themselves awake with a bite of frost. Dangerous. Yes, frostbite lurks everywhere, but better a blistered ear than a final sleep. You think about the irony. Men here trained for months to fight Soviet soldiers, yet the real killer creeping up on you is drowsiness. Soviet patrols could be repelled. Tanks could be destroyed. But how do you repel your own brain shutting down? There's no manual for that. And yet, amidst the misery, there's a strange solidarity. You and your comrades glance at each other, see the same sunken eyes, the same drooping heads, and you know you're not alone. Misery loves company, and in a twisted way, company helps misery feel less lethal. You poke each other with rifle butts, crack jokes at 3 in the morning, sing nonsense songs to fill the silence. Each gesture says the same thing: don't close your eyes, I'm here to. The debate continues, even decades later. Historians still argue whether fatigue alone was responsible for so many collapses on the Eastern Front, or whether men simply lacked the morale to push on. Did exhaustion break discipline, or did broken discipline make exhaustion worse? You may not have the answer tonight, but you feel the weight of the question pressing on your shoulders with every second that passes. Finally, you glance at the sky. No dawn yet, just an endless stretch of darkness and frost. You sigh, muttering to yourself that fatigue is worse than the Russians, worse than the hunger, worse even than lice crawling at your collar. At least those enemies are visible. Fatigue is a shadow that hides inside you, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and you know, though you don't yet admit it, that this silent battle will drive men to do desperate, bizarre things before the winter is over. You learn quickly that desperate times call for desperate measures, and nothing illustrates that better than the bizarre tricks soldiers dream up to outwit fatigue. Out here, survival isn't always about outgunning the enemy, it's about outsmarting your own biology. You've already tried the obvious: stamping your feet, slapping your cheeks, singing old songs until your throat cracks. But when you're trapped in endless nights of cold and dread, men begin to improvise in ways that sound absurd when told later, but at the time, they're lifelines. You remember watching one soldier scoop a handful of snow and shove it straight down his collar. He yelped like a wounded dog, thrashing around, and for a good 10 minutes he was the most alert man in the trench. Another fellow pressed his face against the frozen earth until his skin turned beet red, grinning like he'd discovered the secret cure for weariness. A few comrades laughed, muttering that he'd just invented the Siberian spa treatment. Jokes like that keep spirits afloat, because without them, the silence would crush you faster than the cold. The strangest trick you've seen so far. A man actually licked his rifle barrel ice-cold metal on his tongue. He pulled away, cursing, with half the trench doubled over in laughter. It was ridiculous, but for those few minutes, nobody was drowsy. Pain works like coffee out here. It wakes you, sharp and brutal, reminding you that you're alive. And when you have no other option, you welcome it. Historians today collect stories like these with fascination. Were they exaggerations? Maybe. Men returning home decades later often told tales of shoving icicles in their boots or chewing raw tobacco until they vomited, all just to keep their eyes open. Some scholars argue such stories were products of memory half-truths inflated over time. Others believe the details, bizarre as they sound, were real because the conditions demanded them. After all, necessity invents what common sense would normally forbid, and the remedies weren't always painful. Sometimes they were downright silly. One soldier in your unit swore that singing nursery rhymes backward kept him alert. Another man chattered about windmills endlessly, convinced that constant talking, no matter how nonsensical, was the key. You roll your eyes at first, but after hours of silence, even nonsense chatter feels like a lifeline. It's easier to laugh at ridiculous rhymes than to surrender to the warm pull of unconsciousness. A fact worth noting: German troops weren't the only ones coming up with strange methods. Soviet soldiers to devise their own tricks, pinching their ears until they bled, or stomping in circles like dancers in some ghostly midnight ritual. Sleep deprivation didn't care what uniform you wore. Both sides fought the same invisible battle, each convinced the other had it easier. You think about this sometimes, about how both armies, bitter enemies, share the same human struggle. Across no man's land, maybe some Red Army conscript is also sticking snow in his boots, muttering songs under his breath. It doesn't make you pity him, exactly, but it does remind you that war is more than maps and orders. It's bodies, fragile and stubborn, doing anything to keep moving. There's another layer to it though, command expectations. Officers issue orders to stay alert, to patrol through the night, to watch for enemy movement. They don't care how you do it, only that you manage it. And so soldiers improvise. If the officers had seen half the antics that went on in the trenches, men barking like dogs or biting their own arms raw, they might have called it madness. But in practice, commanders often looked the other way. Alert men, no matter how ridiculous, were better than corpses. One quirky but genuine fact: some German units handed out tiny rations of coffee, substitute made from roasted barley or chicory, bitter as ashes, meant to jolt you awake. Did it work? Not really. Soldiers joked that it tasted more like burnt shoe leather than anything else. But even the ritual of drinking something hot gave the illusion of strength. Illusion, in times like these, was often enough, and still, fatigue never truly vanished. You could scare it off for 10 minutes, maybe half an hour, but it always circled back, patient as a wolf. You begin to sense that these tricks aren't solutions, they're delays. You're buying time, one ridiculous act at a time. Slapping, stamping, laughing, even biting your tongue until it bleeds. Time is all you can afford to purchase, because dawn eventually comes, and dawn means movement. Some scholars now say this endless improvisation reveals more than military hardship, reveals the very nature of human endurance. You don't simply give up when your body begs for sleep. You invent. You turn into a clown, a masochist, a child reciting rhymes. You scrape every corner of creativity to trick your brain into believing it can go on just a little longer. Of course, not everyone believes these stories. Some historians suggest that tales of men licking rifles and shoving snow down collars are exaggerations born out of post-war storytelling. A way for veterans to capture the absurdity of their youth. After all, memory blurs when filtered through decades of distance. Others counter that if you gather enough accounts from different units across different winters, the patterns repeat too often to be coincidence. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere between myth and reality. You press your back against the trench wall, grinning faintly at the absurdity of it all. You're meant to be part of one of the most modern armies in history, and yet your best defense against sleep is a snowball in the face. High command would never put that in the official reports, but for you, it's the only thing that matters tonight. And as you glance at the soldier next to you, eyes sunken, lips cracked, you know the strange improvisations will only grow stranger. Before long, the biting will begin. You've heard whispers about it already, and as ridiculous as it sounds, you feel in your bones that when the time comes, you'll do it too. At first, it seems like a joke, the kind of rumor that bounces around trenches when men are too tired to know what's real. Someone mutters that soldiers in another company have started biting each other to stay awake. You laugh, of course, who wouldn't? But then the night grows colder, darker, heavier, and suddenly the idea doesn't sound so ridiculous. It begins small. A man nods off mid-sentence, nearly dropping his rifle. His comrade jabs him with an elbow, then, in frustration, bites down on the back of his hand. The shock is instant. The soldier jerks awake, cursing, but he's awake. And in the trenches, that's all that matters. Word spreads. not through official orders, but through whispers, through the half-smirks of exhausted men who discover that pain works when nothing else does. You experience it yourself before long. Your head droops forward, shoulders slumping, when suddenly sharp pressure. A friend clamps down on your arm, teeth digging just enough to sting. You yelp, twisting away, but the fog of sleep vanishes instantly. You glare at him, he shrugs, and you both chuckle despite yourselves. It's ridiculous, yes, but so is licking rifle barrels or stuffing snow into your boots. In a world this absurd, biting feels almost logical, and so it spreads. At first, men hesitate. Biting your comrade feels too animalistic, too primitive, like you're no longer soldiers but something closer to beasts. Yet survival doesn't care about dignity. One by one, men give in. A nip on the shoulder, a clamp on the forearm, even a quick bite to the thigh if someone slumps too low. Bruises bloom like medals, proof that you've outlasted another night, the first time you're the one doing the biting. It feels strange. You grip your friend's sleeve, press your teeth into his arm, and feel the dull resistance of muscle beneath wool. He jerks awake, eyes wide, then bursts out laughing. You laugh too, shaking your head. War is supposed to be about glory and flags, but here you are, reduced and gnawing on each other like restless dogs. The absurdity doesn't erase the effectiveness. It works, every time. Sharp pain slices through drowsiness, and suddenly you're alert, blood pumping, vision sharp again. It's crude, yes, but in the frozen trenches, crude is good enough. You realize that in this place, the line between man and animal blurs easily. You're fighting with teeth as much as with rifles, but instead of the enemy, it's your own body you're trying to defeat. One historian later remarked that such practices symbolized the breakdown of military order under extreme duress. Soldiers, he argued, had reverted to primal behavior, their discipline corroded by cold and fatigue. Others disagree, insisting it was ingenuity, strange but clever solution to an impossible problem. The truth, it probably depends on how much sleep the historian himself had when he wrote it. The biting ritual becomes part of trench life. Men talk about it openly now, sometimes even making jokes of it. Better my teeth than Russian bullets, someone quips. Another smirks, showing a bruise on his arm like a badge of honor. You even hear whispers that some soldiers preferred to be bitten rather than risk falling asleep and facing a court-martial for dereliction of duty. Pain, after all, is temporary. Punishment or death lasts longer, and it isn't always grim. Sometimes it turns into dark humor. One man bares his arm dramatically, daring his comrades to take a bite. Gentlemen, buffets, open. Another feigns vampirism, hissing through his teeth before nipping someone's sleeve. The trench erupts in laughter, though deep down everyone knows it's no joke. Humor is the only way to make the unthinkable feel manageable. Of course, there are consequences. Bites leave marks, sometimes deep enough to break skin. Infection lurks in every wound, and the trenches are far from sterile. A few men develop raw patches, even festering sores, and yet they keep doing it. The choice is simple. Live with scars, or risk never waking again. No one hesitates long. The act binds you in strange ways. You bite your comrade's arm, he bites yours, and suddenly you've shared a kind of intimacy that transcends military ranks. Teeth marks become a silent code, a reminder that you were both awake, both stubborn enough to fight through another night. It's not brotherhood in the traditional sense, but something more feral, forged in frost and desperation. Historians still puzzle over it. Was it widespread across the Eastern Front, or confined to a few units. Accounts vary. Some memoirs mention it casually, as if everyone did it. Others don't mention it at all, perhaps out of embarrassment, perhaps because not every company resorted to such extremes. Scholars argue whether it was an actual ritual or merely a handful of anecdotes blown out of proportion. But sitting here, in this frozen foxhole, teeth marks stinging on your arm, you know one thing for certain: it happened. And when you're fighting sleep as fiercely as you're fighting the Soviets, you don't care whether future historians believe you. Oddly enough, the ritual shifts the way you think about the war. You begin to realize that it isn't only about battles or strategy. It's about endurance, about how far men will go to stay alive, even if that means shedding layers of civilization and dignity. The trenches are a laboratory of survival, and biting is just another experiment that works. When dawn finally arrives, you catch yourself examining the bruise on your arm, pressing it gently and smirking. You survived the night, not because of rifles or discipline, but because someone was willing to sink their teeth into your flesh. That's war in its truest, strangest form. Not parades or medals, but teeth marks hidden under your sleeve. And deep down, you know this is only the beginning. If men are already resorting to biting, what other extremes will follow before winter loosens its grip? You wake to the faint rattle of tin cups and the acrid smell of burned chicory masquerading as coffee. The sun has barely risen, and already your head throbs like it's stuffed with wet rags. The night's bruises are still fresh dark circles on your arms, where teeth pressed too hard. Faint crescents etched into the skin. You grin wryly. Proof of survival. Proof that once again, you cheated sleep. But as the days drag into weeks, biting alone isn't enough. The army introduces its own solution, neat and clinical. Little white pills rattling in paper packets. They call it Pervitin. You call it salvation. It looks innocent, like a sugar tablet, but when you swallow one, it's as though someone flips a switch inside your skull. The fog lifts. Your eyes sharpen. Your heart beats fast enough to feel like you've sprinted without moving. Suddenly, the idea of sleep feels laughable. You could stand guard all night, march 20 miles at dawn, and still grin like you've just had the best rest of your life. The officers don't say much when they hand them out. They frame it as a stimulant, something to keep men alert during critical operations. What they don't admit, or maybe don't know, is that these pills are essentially methamphetamine. Modern readers hear that and gasp, but back then, it was just another tool, like rations or ammunition. Germany prided itself on efficiency, and what's more efficient than a soldier who doesn't need sleep? You notice the change immediately. The trenches, usually thick with yawns and muttered curses, hum with nervous energy after the pills are distributed. Men talk faster, laugh louder, eyes darting restlessly. One fellow can't stop cleaning his rifle over and over until the metal shines like glass. Another paces the length of the trench all night, muttering calculations under his breath as though he's discovered some secret code hidden in the snow. It feels like a miracle drug at first. You remember swallowing one before a night watch, expecting nothing, and then finding yourself so alert that every snowflake seemed distinct, crisp as glass. You thought you could count them if you wanted to. When dawn came, you weren't even tired. For a moment, you believed you'd conquered fatigue itself. But then came the crash. Not at once, not dramatically, just a slow seep of exhaustion, like water leaking into a cellar. You'd stay awake for 2 days straight, buzzing with energy. And then on the third day you'd collapse, harder than ever before. Your body demanded repayment with interest, and you'd sink into sleep so deep your comrades sometimes had to shake you violently to make sure you were breathing. The army didn't talk about the side effects, of course. Why would they? Victory was all that mattered. If a few men twitched uncontrollably or grew paranoid, it was brushed off as nerves. You saw it firsthand. A soldier convinced the Russians were tunneling beneath the trench, hammering at the frozen earth with the butt of his rifle until his knuckles bled. Another burst into laughter mid-battle and couldn't stop, giggling even as shells exploded around him. Historians today still debate the role of Pervitin. Some argue it gave the German army an edge during the early blitzkriegs, helping men push through long marches and sleepless nights with machine-like efficiency. Others insist it was a short-sighted gamble, trading short-term alertness for long-term collapse. Did it win battles, or did it merely keep men awake long enough to stumble into ruin? The answer isn't clear, and perhaps it never will be. You can't deny its effectiveness, though. You once marched with your unit for nearly 72 hours without sleep, fueled only by the tiny white tablets. The world blurred around you, trees swayed like dancers, and your boots seemed to float above the snow, but you kept moving. That was the point. Movement, not comfort. Still, you start to notice the toll. Your hands tremble when you try to write letters home. Your thoughts race so fast that sentences tangle before you can speak them. Sleep, when it finally comes, is filled with jagged dreams, teeth biting, shadows stretching, faces melting into snow. You wake drenched in sweat, heart hammering, only to swallow another pill and begin again. Not every soldier embraces them. Some refuse outright, muttering about poison, insisting they'd rather suffer drowsiness than risk madness. They earn skeptical looks, but also a strange kind of respect. Others hoard the pills, saving them for moments of true desperation, treating them like talismans against collapse. You're somewhere in the middle, grateful for their power, wary of their cost. There's an irony in it. Just weeks ago, you were biting comrades' arms to stay awake. Now you're swallowing laboratory-made speed, courtesy of the German pharmaceutical industry. Progress, they call it. You can't help but laugh at the absurdity, from teeth to chemistry, all in the name of avoiding sleep. But here's the curious part. Biting doesn't vanish. The pills might sharpen your mind, but they don't replace the rituals of the trenches. Men still nip each other's arms, still shove snow down collars, still sing nonsense songs to keep awake. In fact, sometimes the pills make the antics even wildermen laughing hysterically after biting each other, joking about opening a trench dentist's office. Survival and humor blur together until you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Looking back, you realize there's no single solution to fatigue. Pills, biting, snow, laughter, they're all fragments of the same battle. A battle not against Russia, but against the body's stubborn need for rest. And in the long run, that's a fight no army can truly win. The dawn creeps up again, pale and unforgiving. You rub your bruised arms, swallow another tablet, and shoulder your rifle. The war goes on, indifferent to how much sleep you've lost, indifferent to the buzzing in your head. You march forward, half man, half machine, biting, swallowing, laughing, anything to keep your eyes open. You notice it first in their eyes. Men you've shared bread with, men who cracked jokes about lice and wrote letters home by candle stub, begin to drift mid-conversation. Their pupils glaze over, heads tilt forward, and words trail off into the nothingness between wakefulness and dreams. You nudge them, whisper their names, even shake their shoulders, but the fog of exhaustion is heavier than any hand. One soldier across from you once tried to light a cigarette 3 times in a row, forgetting he'd already done it. His fingers trembled, the match flared, and he just stared, smoke curling upward as if the flame itself were mesmerizing. Another leaned against the trench wall, telling a story about his hometown bakery. Halfway through, his head drooped, and the sentence ended in a snore. You and the others laughed softly, but not because it was funny, because you feared the same fate for yourselves. Fatigue strips dignity quicker than bullets. Men slouch like broken marionettes, jaws slack, drool glistening on their collars. They fight their own bodies, muttering, jerking upright, only to slump again moments later. In peacetime, you'd call it laziness. Here, it's survival's thin line, and you feel it yourself. Your words stumble. Thoughts stretch like rubber bands, snapping before they reach your tongue. Sometimes, you blink and lose minutes-tiny blackouts that vanish as soon as they come, leaving you staring blankly at the snow, wondering what just happened. Modern sleep scientists might call them microsleeps, but back then, you didn't have the luxury of terms. You only knew you were slipping. It doesn't take long before officers notice. They scold, they bark orders, but you can see it in their faces too. Same drooping eyelids, the same drawn expressions. Fatigue is democratic. It spares no rank. Even your sergeant once nodded off mid-inspection, jerking awake so suddenly he bit his own tongue. Nobody dared laugh, but the story circled the trench like wildfire. The army tries remedies, coffee substitutes, drills at odd hours, even ordering men to sing while on watch. The singing helps for a while, echoing across the snow like a ghostly choir, but voices grow hoarse, and soon silence swallows the sound again. You're back to the same struggle, forcing your body to resist its most natural demand. Historians argue about just how severe this problem was. Some point to diaries filled with descriptions of men collapsing mid-march or falling asleep while firing. Others say the accounts are exaggerated, wartime dramatics meant to emphasize hardship. But you know what you've seen? You've seen a man fall asleep while standing, knees buckling like a puppet with cut strings. You've seen another topple, face first, into a snowdrift, waking only when his comrades yanked him upright. Exaggeration or not, the evidence lives in bruises and frost-bitten fingers. There's a kind of dark comedy to it. Once, during a lull, a soldier began reciting poetry, Goethe of all things. His voice was soft, rhythmic, and within minutes, half the trench had their eyes closed. Another soldier slapped his thigh, barking, "Stop it, you're putting us to sleep." The laughter that followed was ragged but real. Humor, once again, is the last defense against despair. You wonder sometimes whether the Russians face the same. Surely they do. The winter spares no side. You imagine a Soviet conscript slumping over his rifle, another biting his lip raw, another shaking awake to find frost creeping up his boots. In this strange, shared misery, the enemy becomes almost human, not sympathetic, not forgiven, but human. And yet, fatigue also bonds your own company in unexpected ways. Men who would never share secrets in daylight now lean on each other in the dark, heads resting shoulder to shoulder, taking turns to whisper stories that keep the others awake. One talks about the girl he left behind, another about his father's farm. These are not conversations of strategy or ideology. They are lifelines, thin strands, keeping eyes open against the pull of oblivion. Your own body rebels more each night. Muscles twitch involuntarily. You catch yourself trembling even when still. Hunger blends with exhaustion into a fog that makes the world unreal. Once, you stared at your own hand for nearly 5 minutes, mesmerized by the way the skin cracked under the cold. the way veins stood out like rivers on a map. It was beautiful, in a disturbing sort of way. That's how you know fatigue is winning, when the grotesque feels poetic. There's a debate among historians about whether such experiences shaped the outcome of battles. Did sleep-starved men fire slower? Did they falter on marches, delay reinforcements, cost lives? Or did sheer adrenaline mask it all, pushing soldiers beyond their limits regardless? The answer shifts depending on who you ask. Some veterans insisted fatigue was the real killer. Others shrugged it off as part of soldiering. But when you see comrades slumped like rag dolls, you can't dismiss it as just part of the job. The strangest part comes at dawn. The moment sunlight touches the horizon, men who were nearly comatose seem to jolt awake, as if the universe itself shook them by the collar. You feel it, too sudden energy flooding your veins, eyes snapping open. It's temporary, yes, but miraculous. Daylight, it seems, is the only medicine stronger than biting or pills. Still, the pattern repeats. Night after night, men nod off mid-sentence, heads lolling like marionettes. You brace for it, accept it, even laugh at it, but deep down, you fear it. Because you know that one night, it won't just be a nap, it will be the end. And so you bite harder, laugh louder, sing longer, anything to keep from becoming the next man frozen in his sleep. The order comes down. You're on the midnight watch, the worst shift of them all. You feel the words settle into your stomach like a lump of iron. Midnight watch means standing alone at the edge of the trench, rifle clutched tight, eyes straining into a horizon that seems endless, blanketed in white. Midnight watch means the cold presses closer, the dark feels thicker, and sleep crouches behind your shoulders, whispering for you to give in. You climb the ladder, boots crunching softly, and take your post. The air hits harder up here, away from the body heat of your comrades. You pull your coat tight, though it's as stiff as a board from frozen sweat, and you plant your feet into the snow. Silence is your only companion. Even the artillery in the distance seems to have dozed off for the night. Standing still is torture. Every muscle begs to sit, to crouch, to relax, even for a second. But you know the truth. If you close your eyes here, even briefly, you risk far more than frostbite. A sleeping sentry means a surprise attack. One moment of weakness could end with your entire company wiped out before they know what hit them. That knowledge is the only thing that keeps your eyelids pried open. The tricks return. You bite your lip until it stings. You stamp your feet, feeling nothing below your ankles. You whisper songs to yourself, not even caring if they sound foolish. Silent night drifts from your mouth, not as a hymn, but as a desperate tether to consciousness. You laugh bitterly at the irony, singing a lullaby to avoid falling asleep. The cold plays cruel games. Shapes form in the dark bushes that look like men, snowdrifts that resemble crouched soldiers. You jerk your rifle upward more than once, finger trembling on the trigger, only to realize you've nearly shot a shadow. You curse yourself quietly. Maybe the Russians are out there. Maybe they aren't. Either way, fatigue makes every ghost in the dark look alive. Your comrades know the midnight watch is hardest. Sometimes they whisper encouragement before you climb up. Stay awake. We're counting on you. Sometimes they offer crude humor if you fall asleep. I'll bite you from down here. You smile at the jokes, but you also feel the weight of responsibility. If you fail, it won't just be your bruise-covered arm that suffers. It will be everyone. There's a curious fact about military history. Armies for centuries have wrestled with this problem. From Roman sentries to Napoleonic guards, The midnight watch has always been the soldier's curse. Falling asleep at your post has been punishable by death in almost every army because the stakes are so high. And yet, generation after generation, men continue to struggle with the same human weakness, the need for rest. Historians argue whether strict punishment was effective or cruel. Was it fair to expect men to fight nature itself? Some insist discipline was essential, that without it, whole armies would collapse. Others believe it was futile. No threat of execution could conquer exhaustion forever. Looking at yourself now, swaying on your feet, you lean toward the second view. Fatigue doesn't care about rules. It doesn't care about consequences. It only cares about closing your eyes. Time crawls. Minutes feel like hours. You start counting 100 breaths, then another 100, then another. Anything to measure progress, to keep the clock moving. You try to think of home, your family's warm kitchen, your sister's laughter, the smell of roasted chestnuts in winter. But those thoughts backfire. They comfort you too much, pull you toward the soft warmth of imagined quilts. You snap your eyes open, shake your head, and force yourself back to the cold. And then comes the worst moment. You realize, with a chill deeper than frost, that you don't remember the last 5 minutes. You were standing, you were awake, and then nothing. A black gap where time vanished. Did you fall asleep with your eyes open? Did you dream while still upright? The thought terrifies you more than any Russian patrol. If you can't trust your own senses, what else can you trust? You clench your jaw, force yourself to move. You pace in a tight circle, boots crunching in rhythm. You whisper nonsense phrases, anything that keeps the mind engaged. Don't fall, don't fall, don't fall. You almost laugh at yourself. Here you are, a trained soldier in one of history's most mechanized armies, reduced to chanting like a monk just to stay awake when relief finally comes. You nearly collapse, climbing back down into the trench. Your comrades greet you with nods, with tired smiles. They know the ordeal you've endured. They've faced it too. You drop onto your blanket, shaking, eyes burning, body buzzing with nervous energy. You survived another watch, barely. The absurdity hits you as you drift into shallow sleep. The Red Army, the cold hunger, none of them felt as dangerous tonight as the temptation of rest. The midnight watch has reminded you of an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the deadliest battles of war are fought not against men, but against yourself. By the time the biting ritual really takes hold, it feels almost ordinary. What once sparked laughter and disbelief now blends into the rhythm of trench life. You hardly even flinch anymore when someone sinks their teeth into your sleeve to jolt you awake. It's as though the front itself has whispered a strange commandment to every soldier. If your comrade sleeps, you bite. And strangely, no one questions it. It spreads from man to man like a quiet contagion. A corporal does it to his sentry, then that sentry does it to another, and before long, whole squads accept it as common practice. In daylight, you almost pretend it never happens. But at night, when the shadows deepen and the cold presses harder, it becomes as natural as stamping your feet or blowing into your hands. The strangest thing is how quickly the shame fades. At first, men joked about it, called each other dogs or vampires, muttered about turning into wolves in the snow. But soon, the jokes wore off, and the bites became something else: survival. Nobody smirks when teeth marks bloom on forearms or shoulders. They're not scars of humiliation anymore. They're evidence of resilience, tokens of another night endured. You watch it happen one evening. A soldier slumps mid-watch, his rifle drooping dangerously. His comrade doesn't even hesitate. He grabs the man's wrist, sinks his teeth in hard enough to make him yelp, and the man jerks awake. They don't exchange words, just nod once, like two workers completing an ordinary task. The whole thing takes seconds, and then the trench falls silent again. In a way, biting becomes ritualized. There's almost a rhythm to it, a droop, a nip, a sharp inhale, a return to wakefulness, like a strange dance, choreographed by exhaustion itself. You can even hear it sometimes in the dark muffled curses, followed by nervous chuckles, followed by silence once more. Historians argue whether it really was widespread, or whether later memoirs exaggerated it for dramatic effect. Some suggest that the practice was more rumor than reality, confined to a few desperate units. Others insist the consistency of the stories proves it was common, even if unofficial. The debate rages on, but you know what you've seen, and for you, it's no longer extraordinary. It's just another weapon in the arsenal against sleep. The bruises pile up. You glance at your forearm one morning and see a constellation of bite marks, overlapping purples and blues. They throb faintly, but you don't complain. Everyone bears the same marks. It's a kind of equalizer. Rank doesn't protect you from teeth. Even officers stumble in the dark. Even they wake to the sharp sting of a comrade's jaw. The practice even evolves. Some men develop preferences biting shoulders instead of arms, calves instead of hands. Others joke about technique, swearing that a quick nip is better than a deep clamp. You've heard soldiers compare bite marks, like athletes compare bruises after a game. There's pride in it, strange as that sounds. Still, not everyone embraces the ritual. A few men recoil, muttering that they'd rather freeze than be treated like livestock. One even punched his comrade for biting too hard. But within a night or two, he too accepted it. Sleep is stubborn, and pride melts quickly when you're nodding off with a rifle in your lap. There's also a darker side. Sometimes the bites are too strong, tearing skin, leaving wounds that fester in the unsanitary trenches. Infection doesn't care about intention. You've seen men wrap rags around raw flesh, gritting their teeth as they swear it was worth it. Better a festering bite than a frozen corpse. But something else grows alongside the ritual: camaraderie. Biting isn't just survival anymore. It's a bond. You place your trust in another man's teeth, and he in yours. It's ridiculous, yes, but it creates a sense of connection, a pact sealed not by words but by bruises, in a place where death lurks at every corner. Such bonds mean everything. One evening, as you trade jokes about whose bite hurts most, you realize you're laughing harder than you have in weeks. There's something absurdly human about it, something that reminds you that even stripped of dignity, you're still alive, still capable of finding humor in desperation. The laughter echoes off the trench walls, thin and sharp, but real. Later, when the war is long over, some veterans will refuse to speak of it. Too humiliating, they'll say, too animalistic. Others will lean into the absurdity, retelling the stories with wild gestures, making younger listeners howl with laughter. And historians will sift through those conflicting memories, trying to pin down truth. Was biting a widespread phenomenon, or just a handful of desperate moments preserved in folklore? No one can say for sure, but you know, you've lived it. You've felt the sting of teeth in the night, the rush of wakefulness, the gratitude that you weren't left to slumber into death. For you, it's not myth or rumor. It's survival written into your skin. The ritual spreads beyond your own company now. You hear it mentioned in passing by soldiers from other units, whispered with the same mix of shame and acceptance. It's no longer just your secret tits, part of the front's strange culture. One of those unwritten rules that nobody admits in official reports, but everybody understands. And though you can't quite explain why, you begin to feel that the bites, ridiculous as they are, mean something more. They remind you that survival is not a solitary effort. You don't stay alive because you're strong or clever. You stay alive because someone else cared enough to hurt you awake. Frostbite becomes the constant shadow in this battle against fatigue. To keep yourself awake, you move stamping your boots, swinging your arms, clapping your hands together until your palms sting. The movement buys you minutes of alertness, but the cold always demands attacks. Toes go numb, fingertips burn, and then fade into eerie silence, as if they've stopped existing. You flex them desperately, whispering curses into the frozen air, praying they'll still be there come morning. Some men invent little dances, not graceful, not even coordinated, just jerky stomps and shuffles in the snow. A trench full of soldiers swaying and stamping looks ridiculous, like some carnival troupe rehearsing in the middle of nowhere. But it works. The heart beats faster, the blood stirs, the fog lifts. You even laugh sometimes at the sight of it, grizzled men with frost on their lashes, bouncing clumsily to an unheard tune. One fellow hums polka rhythms to his steps, earning muffled chuckles from the rest. The fire, of course, is the ultimate temptation. A real fire could warm you, banish numbness, maybe even grant a few moments of peace. But fire is dangerous here. A flame means light, and light means visibility. You imagine Soviet eyes catching the flicker in the dark, shells falling within minutes. Still, men risk it. A tiny flame, shielded with helmets or dugout walls, becomes a beacon of hope. You edge closer, savoring the brief sting of thawing fingers, even as you fear what might come with it. One night, you remember a soldier holding his hands too close, half asleep. His wool gloves caught fire, and he yelped, batting at the sparks. The trench roared with laughter, but under the laughter was truth. Warmth and wakefulness always came with risk. You're reminded again that nothing is free here, not comfort, not rest, not even the luxury of heat. There's a scholarly debate about how much frostbite crippled the German army compared to fatigue. Some records suggest tens of thousands of men lost fingers, toes, even whole feet to the cold. Others argue that these numbers were inflated later, folded into stories of failure on the Eastern Front. But as you wiggle your numb toes, you know statistics mean little when each night feels like a dice roll against losing part of yourself. Strangely, frostbite and fatigue feel connected. The colder you get, the more your body pleads for sleep, as though shutting down is the best defense. Yet sleep in the cold is a death sentence. You've heard stories of men found curled like children, peaceful expressions frozen forever. In some twisted way, it almost seems merciful, the most painless end war can give. But you fight it because giving in means you'll never wake to see another dawn. So you invent little bargains with yourself. Just 5 more minutes of stamping. Just 1 more lap of pacing the trench. Just 1 more song. The fire in your lungs, the ache in your legs, those become proof you're still alive. When the biting fails, when the pills fail, when laughter fades, movement is what remains. Primitive, relentless, almost animal. Move or die, and the irony. You trained for war with tanks, planes, precision rifles. Yet here, in the endless winter, survival depends on something as simple as stomping your feet like a restless horse. You glance around at your comrades, their silhouettes jerking in the snow, and you realize war has stripped everything down to its rawest truth. Bodies trying to endure, in the quiet moments. You let yourself believe these dances are more than desperation. They're rituals, in their own way, keeping the darkness at bay. You stamp, you sway, you mutter old songs, and the night stretches on, one heartbeat at a time. When dawn finally comes, pale and gray, you're drenched in sweat beneath your frozen coat. Your feet ache, your legs throb, and yet you smile faintly. You survived another night by turning frostbite and fire into allies, however imperfect. Another night stolen from the cold, another night alive. By now, even the officers have noticed the strange tactics you and your comrades use to stave off sleep. At first, they barked orders, threatening punishment for unprofessional behavior. But after enough nights of finding sentries slumped over rifles, they learned to turn a blind eye. What mattered wasn't how you stayed awake, it was that you stayed awake at all. You can almost see the shift in their expressions. When a lieutenant catches two men biting each other's arms, his mouth twitches as if to scold them, but then he sighs and moves on. When a sergeant finds a soldier pacing in circles, muttering like a lunatic, he shakes his head but doesn't interfere. Somewhere along the chain of command, practicality has outweighed dignity. Awake men are useful. Asleep men are corpses. That's the new standard. It's an odd relief, in a way. The army, usually obsessed with order, suddenly tolerates chaos. Uniforms may be spotless in parades, but here in the snow, officers ignore bloodstains on sleeves and bruises on forearms. They ignore laughter echoing in the night, soldiers jabbing each other awake, or the sudden sharp curses when teeth sink too deep. The old rules bend, reshaped by necessity. There's irony in it. You joined what was meant to be one of the most disciplined armies in history. German command was legendary for precision, punctuality, and obedience. And yet, when faced with the Russian winter, that iron discipline melts away like frost on a match flame. Biting, stamping, nonsense songs, muttering behaviors that would have earned ridicule in training are now quietly accepted. Some officers even encourage it. You recall one captain jokingly suggesting that men line up for nightly vaccinations, offering their arms to be bitten in sequence. The trench erupted in laughter, and though the joke stung, it also carried truth. The ritual was now part of your survival strategy. Even authority figures recognized it, though they framed it with humor. Still, official reports remain silent. Diaries mention it, letters home omit it. No officer ever records in a logbook morale boosted by sanctioned biting. Instead, they use vague phrases. Troops are alert despite conditions, discipline maintained. But you, sitting in the muck with bruises on your forearms, know what those words really mean. They mean the command structure is held together by teeth marks and laughter. Historians puzzle over this silence. Was it shame? Did commanders refuse to admit how far soldiers had to go to fight exhaustion? Or did they simply not notice, to weary themselves to pay attention? Some argue that the absence of official mention proves the practice was rare. Others counter that armies rarely document the absurd. They focus on battles, not bruises. And yet, scattered across memoirs and whispered in post-war interviews, the same odd details surface, too many to dismiss. And so, in your trench, it becomes an unspoken agreement. Officers look away, soldiers carry on. The lines blur. Discipline is no longer polished boots and crisp salutes. Discipline is staying awake, no matter the method. It's strange, too, how this tolerance creates a sense of solidarity. For once, you feel less like a cog in a machine and more like part of a shared struggle. When an officer nods at your ridiculous antics instead of punishing you, you glimpse a rare moment of humanity. He's tired too. He understands. One night, you even catch your lieutenant biting his own arm, just enough to jolt himself. You pretend not to notice. He pretends not to see your smirk. No words are exchanged, but the meaning is clear. Even those at the top aren't immune. There's a deeper question that lingers, though. Does this bending of rules strengthen the army or weaken it? Some argue that adaptation is resilience, that by allowing such odd methods, the force becomes more capable of enduring hardship. Others argue the opposite, that once discipline cracks, morale crumbles with it, leaving only chaos. Looking around at your company, you feel the answer lies somewhere between. Order hasn't vanished, just changed shape. Instead of marching in step, you're bruising each other awake. Instead of crisp salutes, you're muttering jokes through chattering teeth. But in its own way, it's still discipline. It's the discipline of survival. And maybe that's what war really is. Not grand strategies or flawless parades, but men improvising in mud and snow, bending rules until they no longer resemble rules at all. Commanders can write their reports. Historians can debate, but you know the truth firsthand. The Eastern Front runs not on precision, but on desperate adaptation. The night drags on. You watch a fellow soldier slump forward, only to snap awake as his comrade nips his arm. The officer standing nearby pretends to study the horizon, ignoring the scene entirely. You smile faintly. In another life, in another war, this might have been scandalous. Here, it's just another tool of survival. And as dawn creeps up once more, pale and unforgiving, you realize that in this place, rules are as brittle as ice. What endures isn't regulation, it's the will to stay awake. You've lost track of the number of nights now, but one question gnaws at you as fiercely as the cold. How long can a man survive without real sleep? It's a puzzle whispered through the trenches, debated between sips of chicory brew, muttered during the endless pacing under the stars. Nobody knows for certain. Some claim 3 days is the limit, others insist 5, while a few boast of lasting a full week. The truth, like most things in war, is murky. You test your own limits each night. 2 days without proper rest leaves you hollow-eyed but functional. 3 days brings tremors in your hands and strange flickering visions in the corners of your sight. By the 4th day, you feel like your thoughts are made of glass, fragile, brittle, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. When sleep finally comes, it crashes over you like an avalanche, dragging you under so deeply that even a shouted order barely wakes you. Stories circulate, some half-believed, some whispered like legends. One soldier swore he saw comrades stay awake for 7 days straight during a forced march, eyes bloodshot, muttering nonsense until they finally collapsed in a heap. Another insists he heard about a unit kept awake so long that men began laughing uncontrollably, even as shells exploded around them. Exaggerations, perhaps, but with each night you endure, they sound less absurd. Modern scientists, long after the war, debate the very same question. Laboratory experiments suggest the human body begins to break down after just 3 sleepless nights. By the 5th, hallucinations creep in. By the 7th, the brain itself starts to falter. Yet, some historians argue the harsh conditions of the front distorted those limits. Men pushed further than any test subject ever could, because survival demanded it. Others insist those accounts are embellished, colored by memory and trauma. In the trench, theory doesn't matter. What matters is the here and now, the weight in your eyelids, the ache in your bones, the endless arithmetic of hours without rest. You measure your resilience not in days, but in the space between blinks. You've begun to notice the strange tricks your mind plays when deprived of rest. Sometimes you swear you hear music drifting across the snow, only to realize it's the wind in the pines. Once, you saw a candle flickering in the distance, glowing warm and golden till it dissolved into a snowdrift. These visions unsettle you, but they also carry a grim humor. One soldier quipped, "If I see a tavern out there, I'm going in, Russians or not." The trench erupted in laughter, laughter that sounded a little too sharp, a little too close to hysteria. There's also the odd sensation of time bending. Minutes stretch like hours, then collapse in a blink. You'll find yourself staring at your rifle, thinking it's been seconds, only to discover half an hour has slipped away. The war itself feels suspended in this fog battles, victories, losses, all drowned beneath the more immediate struggle of staying awake. Your sergeant, trying to inspire discipline, once barked that no man can last more than 3 nights without rest. A corporal immediately muttered, "Then we're already ghosts." You laughed, even though the truth stung. Ghosts, that's what you feel like, drifting through days in a half-dream, clinging to wakefulness by sheer will. The body rebels in small, insidious ways. Your hands shake when you try to write letters home. Your speech slurs, as though your tongue is too heavy. You forget simple words, stumble over phrases you've known since childhood. Sometimes you even forget where you are for a moment, blinking at the trench wall as though it belongs to someone else's life. Yet, amidst all this, there's a strange pride. Each day without sleep becomes a badge, proof that you've endured what most couldn't. You trade boasts with comrades. 3 nights, one says. 4, another counters. Someone jokes about opening a competition, prizes for the last man standing. The laughter that follows is ragged, but it holds a spark of defiance. Historians still argue over whether fatigue shaped the outcome of the Eastern Front. Did it dull reflexes, slow decisions, tip battles toward disaster? Some claim that German offensives faltered not only from Soviet resistance, but from sheer exhaustion, men too weary to march, too numb to fight. Others insist fatigue was just one hardship among many, no more decisive than hunger or frostbite. The debate remains unresolved, like so many threads of history. For you, the debate feels irrelevant. Fatigue isn't an abstract factor. It's a daily opponent, a shadow that presses against your shoulders. You fight it with teeth, with pills, with laughter, with movement. Sometimes you win, sometimes you stumble, but always it's there, lurking. Tonight, as you lean against the trench wall, eyes burning, you wonder again, how many nights can you endure? 3, 4, 7. The question has no answer, not one that matters. Because whether your body gives out on the 3rd night or the 5th, the war will not pause. The dawn will still come, and with it, another march, another watch, another battle against the weight of your own eyelids. You close your eyes just for a second. You tell yourself, then jerk them open again. Heart pounding, too close, far too close. You mutter under your breath, promising you'll never make that mistake again. But deep down, you know you will. Everyone does. That's the truth of it, in the war against sleep. Victory is never permanent, and so you go on, trapped in this endless cycle of wakefulness and collapse, chasing an answer to a question that can never really be answered. How long can a man last without sleep? Long enough, you suppose. Long enough to fight another day. When the biting loses its novelty, and even the pills start to feel like poison, your mind drifts to older remedies, not military science, not factory-made stimulants folk cures, the kind your grandparents might have sworn by in dim kitchens back home. It's strange how war reduces everything to the most basic instincts, and how, in desperation, you reach backward for wisdom buried in memory. You recall your grandmother insisting that raw onions kept farmers awake during long harvest nights. She said the sharp bite in the mouth jolted the senses like lightning. You laughed at the idea back then, wrinkling your nose at the smell. Now you'd give anything for a single onion, anything to feel that burning sting. Some men chew on frozen bark or pine needles instead, convincing themselves the bitterness has the same effect. It doesn't, but the ritual matters more than the result. Others whisper about chewing tobacco, though it's scarce out here. When a pack is found, it's passed around like treasure. The harsh taste, the nausea that sometimes follows, it all helps keep eyelids pried open. One soldier even claimed to chew leather straps, gnawing them like jerky, just to give his jaw something to do. You stared at him in disbelief, but when you saw how wide awake he looked, you almost envied him. There are stranger tricks too, half remembered from stories told by firelight. Back home, shepherds supposedly tied strings around their fingers to cut circulation slightly, the pain keeping them alert through long nights. A few comrades try it with bootlaces, grimacing as their fingertips turn pale. They call it their homemade alarm clock. The method is crude, but like everything else, it buys a few minutes of wakefulness. It's easy to scoff at such folk wisdom in daylight, but in the long hours of night, with the snow pressing close and the silence thick, you'll try anything. Tradition becomes another weapon in the arsenal against sleep. You hum lullabies in reverse, mutter old prayers, not because you believe them, but because the rhythm steadies your mind. You even recall a school teacher's advice that splashing cold water on your face keeps drowsiness at bay. No water here, of course, so snow must do. You scoop handfuls and rub them against your skin until your cheeks burn raw. Historians, looking back, note that soldiers across many cultures turned to folk remedies when modern tools failed them. Coffee wasn't always available, and stimulants came with side effects. So men defaulted to tradition, chewing, humming, pinching themselves, even reciting scripture. Was it superstition or resourcefulness? Scholars argue both sides. Some dismiss these practices as quaint distractions. Others see them as crucial evidence of human resilience. The debate hardly matters to you. What matters is that the old methods provide comfort, even if they don't truly work. The act of doing anything against sleep, feels empowering. Better to chew bark than to sit helpless while your body betrays you one night. As you pace the trench, muttering your grandfather's proverb, a tired horse still pulls the cart. A comrade bursts out laughing. "Your horse is already dead," he says, slapping your back. You laugh too, because in that absurd exchange, you feel a spark of home. Folk sayings, superstitions, silly rhymes, they carry the warmth of another world. A reminder that you're not just a soldier in Russia, but a human with roots. Elsewhere, there's also comfort in the shared absurdity. You catch a man reciting multiplication tables like a prayer, another whispering jokes to himself, another tugging at his own earlobes as if the pain will anchor him. It's foolish, yes, but the foolishness keeps you alive. You start to believe that perhaps survival itself depends less on logic than on imagination. A curious fact you once heard resurfaces. Medieval monks, during long vigils, supposedly fought sleep by pressing cold stones against their temples or standing barefoot on icy floors. You chuckle at the thought. Centuries pass, wars change, yet here you are repeating the same rituals, trading cold stones for snow, trading chants for muttered songs. Maybe humanity has always fought this same enemy. Across time and place, some historians argue these shared methods reflect cultural memory habits passed down unconsciously, resurfacing when modern tools collapse. Others argue it's simply coincidence, the human brain inventing the same solutions when pressed to extremes. You find yourself caring less about the explanation. What matters is that you and countless soldiers before you discovered the same truth. Sometimes the smallest, silliest tricks are the only ones that work. As dawn creeps over the trench, you rub your sore jaw, raw from chewing bark, and grin faintly. You know the method didn't truly keep you awake, but the act of trying gave you strength. And maybe that's the secret, not the onion, not the snow, not the string, but the stubborn belief that you can resist, even if only for another hour. The debates aren't just happening in university halls decades later. They begin right there in the dugouts, whispered between yawns and coughs. Soldiers, half asleep, argue over whether all these strange tricks, biting, chewing bark, singing backwards are signs of ingenuity or plain madness. One man insists biting is simply survival, nothing more than a practical tool, no different than stamping your feet. Another mutters that it proves the war has already broken them, dragging men down to beasts gnawing on each other in the dark. You listen, too tired to take a side, but the thought sticks in your mind. Some historians frame it the same way. In their writings, biting becomes a symbol, either of desperation, pushing men into animal behavior, or of creativity under pressure. Did these acts preserve discipline or destroy it? Was the biting ritual a clever adaptation or a shameful collapse of military order? The answers, of course, depend on who's telling the story. One evening, the argument in your trench grows heated. A corporal insists that the tales of biting are exaggerated, soldier folklore, as he calls it. He swears he's never seen it himself. Immediately, half the trench bursts out laughing, baring their arms to reveal purple crescents of bruises. Folklore. One man grins, pointing to his own bite marks. The corporal falls silent, embarrassed, but not convinced. Doubt lingers, even when evidence is written on skin. That's the nature of memory. In war it bends. Some truths are hidden out of shame. Others are exaggerated to fill the silence of long winters. You suspect that one day, when men sit around telling their grandchildren stories, the biting will either vanish entirely or expand into legend. Perhaps they'll laugh it off, pretending it never really mattered. Or perhaps they'll embellish, spinning tales of trenches filled with half-mad men gnawing at each other like wolves. The odd thing is, you don't feel ashamed when you think about it. The world outside might see it as humiliating, but inside the trench, it feels different. A bruise from a comrade's teeth means you're still alive. You carry the mark, like a medal no officer would ever pin on you. Survival has its own kind of honor, even if it looks absurd to anyone else. Still, part of you wonders how it will be remembered. Will future historians believe it happened? Some insist it's myth, invented by tired minds, or exaggerated in memoirs. Others say the consistency of scattered accounts proves it must have been widespread. The truth likely sits somewhere between, hidden in the frost-covered nights that no pen can truly capture. There's another layer to the debate, too, about dignity. Some soldiers whisper that biting strips them of their humanity. Dogs bite, one mutters, shaking his head. Not men. Others snap back that dogs at least survive the winter, while pride freezes you solid. It's a clash of philosophy, staged in mud and snow. Which matters more, dignity or endurance? You find yourself drifting between the two camps. In daylight, you wrinkle your nose at the thought, convincing yourself you'll never sink so low again. But when night comes, and your eyelids droop like weighted curtains, you bare your arm willingly, grateful for the sting that snaps you awake. Philosophy matters less when your body is on the brink of collapse. Scholars, of course, love these kinds of debates. They argue about whether trench culture was shaped more by necessity or by shared imagination. Did soldiers invent biting because nothing else worked, or because they needed rituals no matter how bizarre to feel they had some control? Some even suggest biting wasn't about staying awake at all, but about bonding, shared pain, shared absurdity, shared laughter in the face of misery. Was it survival, or was it brotherhood masquerading as survival? The answer, you suspect, is both. When you recall the nights most vividly, it isn't just the pain you remember. It's the laughter that followed, the smirks exchanged, the quiet gratitude in a comrade's eyes. Perhaps the bite wasn't simply a tool. Perhaps it was a message. I'm here. I won't let you slip away. The debate will never be settled. Future generations will sift through letters and diaries, weighing bruises against silence, anecdotes against skepticism. Some will write that German soldiers bit each other like animals in the snow. Others will dismiss it as rumor. But for you, sitting in the trench, the truth isn't abstract. It throbs faintly on your arm, a reminder that debates mean little when your life depends on teeth in the night. By now, the strangeness has become routine. What once shocked you now hardly earns a second thought. The trench is full of little absurdities, men shoving snow under their helmets, snapping frozen shirts like boards, biting each other, awakened in the quiet hours. You almost find it funny. Almost the mornings are when the laughter comes easiest. After a night of madness, daylight seems to shine a spotlight on how ridiculous you all are. One man pulls off his boot to reveal a sock so stiff with frost it can stand upright on its own. Another waves his hands around like a magician, snapping shards of ice off his greatcoat as though he's producing doves from a hat. You can't help but laugh, even though you know those stiff socks mean numb toes and those frozen coats mean another night of misery. The jokes are endless, and the humor is sharp-edged, born of exhaustion. A soldier rubs his bruised arm and declares himself the finest beefsteak in the company. Another points to the frost clinging to his mustache and boasts he's growing icicles faster than his beard. Someone else, shivering violently, mutters that the lice have finally frozen solid and packed their bags for Italy. The trench explodes with ragged laughter. Because jokes are oxygen here, you realize humor works the same way biting does. It hurts, but it wakes you up. A good laugh jolts your chest, makes your lungs ache, shakes the fog from your mind for a few minutes. Even the act of inventing jokes keeps your brain from shutting down. One soldier admits he stays awake by composing imaginary comedy routines in his head, pretending he's back at the pub performing for friends. If the war doesn't kill me, he says, the critics will. Historians often puzzle over this kind of humor. Was it a mask, a way to hide despair? Or was it a genuine weapon of survival, as vital as rifles and rations? Some argue it was gallows humor, a way to cope with horror. Others see it as simple camaraderie, the human instinct to laugh even in the darkest places. Perhaps both are true. You don't analyze it to just know that without laughter, the nights would feel twice as long. The surreal nature of fatigue only adds to the comedy. Men behave like sleepwalkers, blurting nonsense, forgetting words, collapsing One evening, a soldier began reciting poetry to keep awake. His voice droned so monotonously that within minutes, half the trench was nodding off. The others shouted at him to stop before he put them all to sleep. Enemy sabotage, someone yelled, and the laughter that followed shook the trench harder than artillery ever could. Another time, a comrade swore he saw a rabbit hop across the snow. He chased it a few steps before realizing he'd been following a blowing scrap of paper. For weeks afterward, men teased him about the Russian attack rabbit. You laughed so hard your ribs ached, though you secretly admitted you might have done the same. The irony is that humor, like biting, becomes rich. Men begin trading jokes as deliberately as they trade guard shifts. It's almost a duty someone must keep the laughter alive, or the fog of silence will swallow you. When fatigue presses hardest, you find yourself repeating old jokes, even bad ones, because anything is better than quiet. The trench becomes a bizarre theater, where the audience is always the same and the jokes are worn thin but still life-saving. It doesn't erase the misery, of course. Hunger still gnaws, cold still numbs, and fatigue still lurks. But humor reshapes it, makes it bearable, turns it into something you can endure. You discover that absurdity is not the enemy. Absurdity is survival. There's another scholarly debate here. Does humor weaken discipline, making soldiers less serious, or does it strengthen resolve by easing tension? Some officers despised the constant joking, calling it childish. Others tolerated it, even encouraged it, realizing that men who laughed were men who could last another night. You suspect the latter are right. Without jokes, without laughter, you'd crumble faster than frost can claim your toes. One morning, as you rub the bruises on your arm and listen to a comrade joke about selling frostbite as a new fashion trend, you realize the absurdity has become part of the story itself. The Eastern Front isn't just battles and maps. It's frozen socks, stiff coats, nonsense songs, phantom rabbits, and the laughter that stitches it all together. And in that laughter, sharp and ragged though it is, you feel something stubborn hope, perhaps. Not hope of victory, not hope of going home soon, but hope of surviving one more night. The laughter fades when daylight exposes the cost of all these strange remedies. Teeth marks bloom purple and black along arms and shoulders. Some look like playful bruises, but others are ugly, raw, even broken skin. Infection waits in every cut. In the trenches, where mud cakes everything and washing is a luxury, a single wound can turn sour quickly. You see it on your own arm. A shallow bite that seemed harmless the night before now throbs with heat. The flesh is swollen, angry red, with little streaks tracing outward like cracks in glass. You wrap it in cloth torn from your undershirt, hoping it won't worsen. The medic frowns when he notices, but shrugs helplessly. There's no ointment, no clean bandages, only advice to keep it dry, which is laughable when you're living in snow. Some men aren't so lucky. One develops a festering sore where a comrade's teeth broke skin. Another complains his arm won't stop twitching, as though the nerves themselves have gone haywire. A few lose patches of skin entirely, leaving raw pink flesh exposed to the biting air. You all joke about becoming walking meals for each other, but beneath the laughter is unease. Biting may keep you awake, but it carves permanent reminders onto your bodies. The side effects of pills begin showing too. Men tremble uncontrollably, eyes wide and glassy. One soldier can't stop grinding his teeth, jaw muscles working even in sleep. Another mutters constantly, unable to hold still. The line between awake and unwell grows thinner every day. Survival has its costs, and you begin to wonder whether the price will haunt you long after the war. Historians debate how widespread these medical consequences were. Some records mention outbreaks of strange skin infections among German units, though they rarely name the cause. Was it frostbite? Was it biting? Was it simply the filth of trench life? Others argue the damage from stimulants, insomnia, paranoia. Trembling did more harm than good in the long run. Yet others counter that, without those desperate measures, men would have frozen in their sleep anyway. The argument circles endlessly, but for you, there's no question. The scars on your arm, the tremors in your hand, are real enough, and yet no one stops. The risk of infection seems small compared to the certainty of death if you drift off in the cold. A festering bite wound is painful, yes, but at least it means you're still alive to feel it. In some twisted way, scars become a kind of tally sheetage bruise, a mark of nights survived. Each twitch a record of hours fought off. You begin to notice how soldiers compare their wounds like badges. A man rolls up his sleeve to reveal a crescent-shaped scar, grinning as though it were a medal. Another boasts about the dentist's mark on his shoulder, pointing proudly as others laugh. It's grotesque, but it binds you together. Shared pain becomes shared identity. Another piece of the trench culture outsiders will never fully grasp. One evening, as you rub a swollen arm, a comrade leans over and mutters, "Better to be scarred than frozen." You nod without hesitation. That's the truth of it. Biting pills, bruises, infections, they're all lesser evils compared to the greater one, sleep in the Russian winter. But the body keeps score, whether you admit it or not. Some men start flinching at sudden touches, nerves too raw from weeks of jolts and bites. Others shake so badly they can barely hold a cigarette. And when you catch sight of your reflection in icy water, you see the toll etched into your own face-sunken eyes, cracked lips, a faint twitch in your cheek that wasn't there before. It's easy to dismiss these things now, in the middle of survival, but you can't help wondering what they'll mean later. Will these scars heal? Will the trembling stop? Or will you carry them forever? Silent echoes of nights spent fighting the most ordinary enemy, sleep. The irony isn't lost on you. The German army prides itself on precision, on discipline, on strength. Yet its soldiers are marked not by glorious victories, but by bite scars, tremors, and infections. Historians may debate the significance, but for you, the meaning is simple. This is the cost of endurance, and still, tomorrow night, you'll bare your arm again without hesitation, because scars can heal. Frostbite can be treated, but death in your sleep leaves nothing behind. Something unexpected grows out of the bruises and the laughter, a bond so strange you'd hardly recognize it as friendship, yet it runs deeper than anything you knew in civilian life. You call it, half-jokingly, the bond of teeth. At first, it sounds ridiculous, brotherhood forged through bite marks, but over time you realize it's not a joke at all. When you let someone sink their teeth into your arm, you're trusting them with more than flesh. You're trusting them to keep you alive, to drag you back from the edge of sleep where death waits quietly. In return, when you bite another, you're saying the same thing. I won't let you slip away. The sting is painful, but it carries a message stronger than words. You notice it in the way men talk about the marks. This one's from Schmidt, last week. That scar there. Muller, on guard duty. You can almost map the war through teeth marks, each one a reminder of nights endured together. Instead of medals, you trade stories of bruises, each with its own tale of exhaustion, laughter, and survival. In daylight, the ritual becomes a source of humor. Soldiers roll up their sleeves, comparing bite patterns, boasting about who bites hardest. One fellow nicknames his comrade the bulldog because his jaw leaves especially deep marks. Another calls himself the mosquito because his bites barely sting. The trench roars with laughter at these nicknames, and for a few minutes, the war feels almost distant. But at night, when fatigue presses in, the ritual takes on a seriousness you can't laugh away. When your comrade's teeth dig into your arm, you feel more than pain, you feel connection. The same man who might grumble at you during the day, who might argue over rations, becomes your lifeline in the dark. In that moment, he is the reason you will see dawn. Historians still wonder about this. Was biting merely a survival trick, or did it truly forge bonds? Some argue it degraded men, stripping them of humanity and dignity. Others counter that it united them, creating solidarity stronger than orders or slogans. The truth is likely both. You may have felt humiliated at first, but over time, humiliation gave way to gratitude. You begin to notice how the biting ritual changes the way you see your comrades. Their floss snoring, complaining, hoarding cigarettes fade beneath the reality that they've kept you alive, and you've done the same for them. You stop thinking of them as fellow soldiers and start thinking of them as brothers bound not by blood, but by survival's teeth. Even officers, usually distant figures of authority, become part of it. You recall the night when your lieutenant, exhausted beyond reason, bared his wrist and muttered, "Do it." A corporal bit down, and the lieutenant gasped, eyes snapping open. No one laughed, no one spoke. But afterward, you all saw him differently, not as a symbol of command, but as another man, struggling in the same darkness. In a way, the ritual erases rank. Everyone, from private to officer, is vulnerable to the same fatigue, the same teeth. The army's rigid hierarchy dissolves in those hours of night, replaced by something rawer, something closer to equality. You realize that survival is the great equalizer. No one escapes it alone. There's a strange comfort in this. For all the brutality of war, for all its cruelty and absurdity, it has given you this bond. You think back to civilian life, to friends who would never understand what it means to trust someone with your very consciousness. Out here, that trust is carved into your skin, shared in bruises and scars. Of course, not everyone remembers it fondly. Some men despise the ritual, refuse to speak of it after the war. They see it as a mark of shame, proof that the front reduced them to animals. Others embrace it, retelling the stories with pride, showing off old scars as though they were medals. And historians, left with fragments of memory, still argue about what it meant. But for you, there is no debate. You know what it meant. The bond of teeth wasn't madness or shamet, was survival. And more than that, it was connection. When you sit in the trench, rubbing a fresh bruise, listening to your comrades laugh about nicknames and scars, you understand that war has stripped away everything but the most essential truth. Humans endure best when they endure together. And if that endurance comes with teeth marks, so be it. Better scars on your arm than silence in your lungs. Better laughter over bruises than death in your sleep. The letters home never tell the whole story. You sit hunched over a scrap of paper, pencil stub trembling in your cold fingers, trying to find words that will make sense to someone far away. You write about the weather, about the food or lack of it, about how you're holding up. You never write about the bruises on your arms, or the strange rituals of biting and stamping, or the way laughter sometimes borders on hysteria. Those things don't belong on paper. Instead, you craft a version of yourself that feels safe to share. The cold is hard, but we manage. The nights are long, but spirits are high. You sprinkle in little details that make it sound almost ordinary: complaints about stiff boots, jokes about frozen bread. The reality is, roar, stranger, but you tuck that away. Why burden your family with truths they can't imagine? Other men do the same. You've seen them carefully censor their own words, scratching out sentences that came too close to reality. One soldier started to describe the biting ritual, but stopped midway, muttering, "They'd think I'd lost my mind." He rewrote the letter, softer, gentler, full of harmless anecdotes. Later, he joked that he should publish a cookbook, how to boil snow and pretend it's soup. You all laughed, but behind the laughter was relief. At least that version could be shared. As dawn creeps over the trench, you rub your sore jaw, raw from chewing bark, and grin faintly. You know the method didn't truly keep you awake, but the act of trying gave you strength. And maybe that's the secret: not the onion, not the snow, not the string, but the stubborn belief that you can resist, even if only for another hour. The debates aren't just happening in university halls decades later. They begin right there in the dugouts, whispered between yawns and coughs. Soldiers, half asleep, argue over whether all these strange tricks, biting, chewing bark, singing backwards are signs of ingenuity or plain madness. One man insists biting is simply survival, nothing more than a practical tool, no different than stamping your feet. Another mutters that it proves the war has already broken them, dragging men down to beasts gnawing on each other in the dark. You listen, too tired to take a side, but the thought sticks in your mind. Some historians frame it the same way. In their writings, biting becomes a symbol, either of desperation, pushing men into animal behavior, or of creativity under pressure. Did these acts preserve discipline or destroy it? Was the biting ritual a clever adaptation or a shameful collapse of military order? The answers, of course, depend on who's telling the story. One evening, the argument in your trench grows heated. A corporal insists that the tales of biting are exaggerated, soldier folklore, as he calls it. He swears he's never seen it himself. Immediately, half the trench bursts out laughing, baring their arms to reveal purple crescents of bruises. Folklore. One man grins, pointing to his own bite marks. The corporal falls silent, embarrassed, but not convinced. Doubt lingers, even when evidence is written on skin. That's the nature of memory. In war it bends. Some truths are hidden out of shame. Others are exaggerated to fill the silence of long winters. You suspect that one day, when men sit around telling their grandchildren stories, the biting will either vanish entirely or expand into legend. Perhaps they'll laugh it off, pretending it never really mattered. Or perhaps they'll embellish, spinning tales of trenches filled with half-mad men gnawing at each other like wolves. The odd thing is, you don't feel ashamed when you think about it. The world outside might see it as humiliating, but inside the trench, it feels different. A bruise from a comrade's teeth means you're still alive. You carry the mark, like a medal no officer would ever pin on you. Survival has its own kind of honor, even if it looks absurd to anyone else. Still, part of you wonders how it will be remembered. Will future historians believe it happened? Some insist it's myth, invented by tired minds, or exaggerated in memoirs. Others say the consistency of scattered accounts proves it must have been widespread. The truth likely sits somewhere between, hidden in the frost-covered nights that no pen can truly capture. There's another layer to the debate, too, about dignity. Some soldiers whisper that biting strips them of their humanity. Dogs bite, one mutters, shaking his head. Not men. Others snap back that dogs at least survive the winter, while pride freezes you solid. It's a clash of philosophy, staged in mud and snow. Which matters more, dignity or endurance? You find yourself drifting between the two camps. In daylight, you wrinkle your nose at the thought, convincing yourself you'll never sink so low again. But when night comes, and your eyelids droop like weighted curtains, you bare your arm willingly, grateful for the sting that snaps you awake. Philosophy matters less when your body is on the brink of collapse. Scholars, of course, love these kinds of debates. They argue about whether trench culture was shaped more by necessity or by shared imagination. Did soldiers invent biting because nothing else worked, or because they needed rituals no matter how bizarre to feel they had some control? Some even suggest biting wasn't about staying awake at all, but about bonding, shared pain, shared absurdity, shared laughter in the face of misery. Was it survival, or was it brotherhood masquerading as survival? The answer, you suspect, is both. When you recall the nights most vividly, it isn't just the pain you remember. It's the laughter that followed, the smirks exchanged, the quiet gratitude in a comrade's eyes. Perhaps the bite wasn't simply a tool. Perhaps it was a message. I'm here. I won't let you slip away. The debate will never be settled. Future generations will sift through letters and diaries, weighing bruises against silence, anecdotes against skepticism. Some will write that German soldiers bit each other like animals in the snow. Others will dismiss it as rumor. But for you, sitting in the trench, the truth isn't abstract. It throbs faintly on your arm, a reminder that debates mean little when your life depends on teeth in the night. By now, the strangeness has become routine. What once shocked you now hardly earns a second thought. The trench is full of little absurdities, men shoving snow under their helmets, snapping frozen shirts like boards, biting each other, awakened in the quiet hours. You almost find it funny. Almost the mornings are when the laughter comes easiest. After a night of madness, daylight seems to shine a spotlight on how ridiculous you all are. One man pulls off his boot to reveal a sock so stiff with frost it can stand upright on its own. Another waves his hands around like a magician, snapping shards of ice off his greatcoat as though he's producing doves from a hat. You can't help but laugh, even though you know those stiff socks mean numb toes and those frozen coats mean another night of misery. The jokes are endless, and the humor is sharp-edged, born of exhaustion. A soldier rubs his bruised arm and declares himself the finest beefsteak in the company. Another points to the frost clinging to his mustache and boasts he's growing icicles faster than his beard. Someone else, shivering violently, mutters that the lice have finally frozen solid and packed their bags for Italy. The trench explodes with ragged laughter, because jokes are oxygen here. You realize humor works the same way biting does. It hurts, but it wakes you up. A good laugh jolts your chest, makes your lungs ache, shakes the fog from your mind for a few minutes. Even the act of inventing jokes keeps your brain from shutting down. One soldier admits he stays awake by composing imaginary comedy routines in his head, pretending he's back at the pub performing for friends. If the war doesn't kill me, he says, the critics will. Historians often puzzle over this kind of humor. Was it a mask, a way to hide despair? Or was it a genuine weapon of survival, as vital as rifles and rations? Some argue it was gallows humor, a way to cope with horror. Others see it as simple camaraderie, the human instinct to laugh even in the darkest places. Perhaps both are true. You don't analyze it to just know that without laughter, the nights would feel twice as long. The surreal nature of fatigue only adds to the comedy. Men behave like sleepwalkers, blurting nonsense, forgetting words, collapsing mid. One evening, a soldier began reciting poetry to keep awake. His voice droned so monotonously that within minutes, half the trench was nodding off. The others shouted at him to stop before he put them all to sleep. Enemy sabotage, someone yelled, and the laughter that followed shook the trench harder than artillery ever could. Another time, a comrade swore he saw a rabbit hop across the snow. He chased it a few steps before realizing he'd been following a blowing scrap of paper. For weeks afterward, men teased him about the Russian attack rabbit. You laughed so hard your ribs ached, though you secretly admitted you might have done the same. The irony is that humor, like biting, becomes rich. Men begin trading jokes as deliberately as they trade guard shifts. It's almost a duty someone must keep the laughter alive, or the fog of silence will swallow you. When fatigue presses hardest, you find yourself repeating old jokes, even bad ones, because anything is better than quiet. The trench becomes a bizarre theater, where the audience is always the same, and the jokes are worn thin but still life-saving. It doesn't erase the misery, of course. Hunger still gnaws, cold still numbs, and fatigue still lurks. But humor reshapes it, makes it bearable, turns it into something you can endure. You discover that absurdity is not the enemy. Absurdity is survival. There's another scholarly debate here. Does humor weaken discipline, making soldiers less serious, or does it strengthen resolve by easing tension? Some officers despised the constant joking, calling it childish. Others tolerated it, even encouraged it, realizing that men who laughed were men who could last another night. You suspect the latter are right. Without jokes, without laughter, you'd crumble faster than frost can claim your toes. One morning, as you rub the bruises on your arm and listen to a comrade joke about selling frostbite as a new fashion trend, you realize the absurdity has become part of the story itself. The Eastern Front isn't just battles and maps. It's frozen socks, stiff coats, nonsense songs, phantom rabbits, and the laughter that stitches it all together. And in that laughter, sharp and ragged though it is, you feel something stubborn hope, perhaps. Not hope of victory, not hope of going home soon, but hope of surviving one more night. The laughter fades when daylight exposes the cost of all these strange remedies. Teeth marks bloom purple and black along arms and shoulders. Some look like playful bruises, but others are ugly, raw, even broken skin. Infection waits in every cut. In the trenches, where mud cakes everything and washing is a luxury, a single wound can turn sour quickly. You see it on your own arm. A shallow bite that seemed harmless the night before now throbs with heat. The flesh is swollen, angry red, with little streaks tracing outward like cracks in glass. You wrap it in cloth torn from your undershirt, hoping it won't worsen. The medic frowns when he notices, but shrugs helplessly. There's no ointment, no clean bandages, only advice to keep it dry, which is laughable when you're living in snow. Some men aren't so lucky. One develops a festering sore where a comrade's teeth broke skin. Another complains his arm won't stop twitching, as though the nerves themselves have gone haywire. A few lose patches of skin entirely, leaving raw pink flesh exposed to the biting air. You all joke about becoming walking meals for each other, but beneath the laughter is unease. Biting may keep you awake, but it carves permanent reminders onto your bodies. The side effects of pills begin showing too. Men tremble uncontrollably, eyes wide and glassy. One soldier can't stop grinding his teeth, jaw muscles working even in sleep. Another mutters constantly, unable to hold still. The line between awake and unwell grows thinner every day. Survival has its costs, and you begin to wonder whether the price will haunt you long after the war. Historians debate how widespread these medical consequences were. Some records mention outbreaks of strange skin infections among German units, though they rarely name the cause. Was it frostbite? Was it biting? Was it simply the filth of trench life? Others argue the damage from stimulants, insomnia, paranoia. Trembling did more harm than good in the long run. Yet others counter that, without those desperate measures, men would have frozen in their sleep anyway. The argument circles endlessly, but for you, there's no question. The scars on your arm, the tremors in your hand, are real enough, and yet no one stops. The risk of infection seems small compared to the certainty of death if you drift off in the cold. A festering bite wound is painful, yes, but at least it means you're still alive to feel it. In some twisted way, scars become a kind of tally sheetage bruise, a mark of nights survived. Each twitch a record of hours fought off. You begin to notice how soldiers compare their wounds like badges. A man rolls up his sleeve to reveal a crescent-shaped scar, grinning as though it were a medal. Another boasts about the dentist's mark on his shoulder, pointing proudly as others laugh. It's grotesque, but it binds you together. Shared pain becomes shared identity. Another piece of the trench culture outsiders will never fully grasp. One evening, as you rub a swollen arm, a comrade leans over and mutters, "Better to be scarred than frozen." You nod without hesitation. That's the truth of it. Biting pills, bruises, infections, they're all lesser evils compared to the greater one, sleep in the Russian winter. But the body keeps score, whether you admit it or not. Some men start flinching at sudden touches, nerves too raw from weeks of jolts and bites. Others shake so badly they can barely hold a cigarette. And when you catch sight of your reflection in icy water, you see the toll etched into your own face-sunken eyes, cracked lips, a faint twitch in your cheek that wasn't there before. It's easy to dismiss these things now, in the middle of survival, but you can't help wondering what they'll mean later. Will these scars heal? Will the trembling stop? Or will you carry them forever? Silent echoes of nights spent fighting the most ordinary enemy, sleep. The irony isn't lost on you. The German army prides itself on precision, on discipline, on strength. Yet its soldiers are marked not by glorious victories, but by bite scars, tremors, and infections. Historians may debate the significance, but for you, the meaning is simple. This is the cost of endurance, and still, tomorrow night, you'll bare your arm again without hesitation, because scars can heal. Frostbite can be treated, but death in your sleep leaves nothing behind. The army itself encourages the omissions. Letters are inspected, and anything too grim risks being cut out or blacked over. Officially, soldiers are meant to keep morale high at home, to present the war as tough but noble. No censors want stories of men gnawing each other's arms just to stay awake. That part of the war lives only in the trenches, hidden between the lines of cheerful greetings and promises of return. Historians later remark on this silence. They sift through archives of soldier correspondence, noting how rarely exhaustion, hallucinations, or bizarre survival tactics appear. Some argue it proves those things were rare. Others say it proves the opposite, that men hid the truth deliberately, ashamed or constrained by censorship. You lean toward the second. You know how much you've already left unsaid. It's strange, this double life. By night, you're stamping your feet, gnawing bark, laughing at phantom rabbits, jerking awake with teeth marks on your arm. By day, You're writing to your family about warm fires you'll sit by someday, about how the snow is picturesque, and how you've never been stronger. Both versions are true in their way, but only one will ever be read. Sometimes you wonder if it's kinder that way. Would your mother sleep better knowing the real conditions? Would your sister smile at your letters if she pictured you biting comrades awake in the dark? You decide no. Better they imagine you trudging bravely through snow, back straight, rifle ready. Better they never know about the absurd rituals that keep you alive. And yet, there's guilt in that silence. You feel as though you're lying, even though you're protecting them. Perhaps one day, years from now, the truth will come out. Perhaps you'll tell it yourself, laughing in disbelief at what you endured. Or perhaps it will vanish, buried in the cold, along with so many other truths the war prefers to keep hidden. One evening, you watch a comrade seal his letter with trembling hands. He mutters, "Told my wife, we have plenty of firewood." Everyone laughs, because the only firewood in sight is snow-dusted corpses of trees stripped bare months ago. But you understand. She doesn't need to know the real fuel is biting flesh and black humor. She only needs to know he's still alive. So the letters continue tidy, careful, optimistic. They carry pieces of the truth, but never the whole. And in that silence lies another survival tactic, shielding the people you love from the strangeness of the front. Historians debate whether this silence distorted memory, whether it left future generations with an incomplete picture of what soldiers endured. They're probably right. But as you fold your letter and tuck it into an envelope, you don't think about history. You think about your mother reading it by candlelight, smiling with relief. You think about your family sleeping peacefully, untroubled by the images you carry, that you decide is worth the omissions. Better for the world to remember a tidier version of you than to know the truth of the teeth marks that sting on your arm tonight. Even when the retreats come, those ragged withdrawals back through snow and mud, the exhaustion doesn't lift. You'd think leaving the front line for barracks or billets would mean relief, maybe even real sleep. But fatigue is stubborn. It clings to you like a parasite, carried from trench to bunk like a shadow that won't let go. The barracks are warmer, yes, but they're crowded. Dozens of men crammed into wooden huts or commandeered barns, lying shoulder to shoulder on straw that smells of damp and sweat. The air is thick, heavy with snores, coughs, and the rustle of restless bodies. You try to sleep, but the noise is endless. Men twitch and mutter, dreams bubbling up from the weeks of deprivation. One man cries out for his mother. Another shouts warnings in half German, half gibberish, as if still standing guard. Sleep here is no softer than the trenchets battle by another name, and the snores. They roll through the room like artillery, shaking the walls. Each man swears he doesn't snore, yet everyone else does. You press your hands over your ears, bury your face in a blanket, but still the thunder rattles your skull. It's absurd. After surviving biting and frostbite, it's the sound of comrades snoring that keeps you awake. Someone jokes about court-martialing the worst offenders, and the room bursts into laughter before sinking back into restless silence. The irony is that even in retreat, you still fear sleep. The cold outside still lingers in your bones, and you've learned too well how quickly drowsiness can turn to death. Some habits never fade. You still jerk awake at the slightest sound, still stamp your feet in place out of reflex, still rub your arm as though expecting teeth to clamp down. Fatigue has rewired you. Sleep is no longer rest's risk. Historians argue whether barracks life offered real recovery for soldiers. Some accounts describe weeks of relative comfort, men catching up on lost sleep and regaining strength. Others insist exhaustion was permanent, a condition carried like a wound, never fully healed until long after the war. The truth probably depends on the soldier, but for you, rest always feels partial, like sipping water through a cracked cup. Enough to survive, never enough to satisfy. Letters from these periods often sound cheerful. Soldiers describe rest and resupply, giving the impression of ease. But behind those words lies the reality. Men collapsing into bunks, too tired to eat. Men so restless they wake screaming from dreams. Men whose eyes remain sunken even after days off the line. Recovery is relative. You don't feel restored, you feel like a frayed rope, patched but still close to snapping. Still, the barracks bring a different kind of camaraderie. Without the constant threat of sudden attack, men share stories more freely. You hear confessions whispered in the dark of fear, of longing, of the absurd tricks they used to stay awake. One man admits he once bit his own wrist when no one else was nearby. Another claims he recited fairy tales to himself, changing the endings just to keep his mind occupied. These stories spark laughter, but also recognition. You all know what it means to be that desperate, and fatigue lingers even in the daylight. During drills, men stumble over their own boots, rifles slipping from their hands. During meals, some fall asleep with spoons halfway to their mouths. Officers try to snap discipline back into place, but even they seem resigned. The exhaustion has become part of the army itself, as constant as uniforms and rifles. There's a strange comfort in the noise, though. The snores, the mutters, the shifting of straw, they remind you that you're not alone in your fatigue. Everyone fights the same battle, whether in trenches or barracks. You glance around the room and see faces slack with exhaustion, bruises hidden beneath sleeves, twitching limbs. It's not noble, but it's honest. This is what survival looks like. Historians still question whether the retreats truly eased suffering or merely postponed it. Did men recover, or did they carry fatigue like invisible wounds? You suspect the latter. Even now, lying in a barracks with a roof over your head, you feel the same weight pressing against your skull, the same fog behind your eyes. The body doesn't forget weeks of stolen sleep. It hoards the debt, demanding payment in tremors and nightmares. Yet you also sense something stubborn inside you. You've endured nights colder than death. You've carried teeth marks like medals. You've laughed at phantom rabbits in the snow. If fatigue hasn't broken you yet, maybe it never will. Maybe this is what endurance truly means, not conquering exhaustion, but learning to live with it, night after night, bunk after bunk, snore after snore. Years later, veterans sit around tables in smoky taverns or quiet living rooms, and the subject comes back. Not battles, not medals, but the nights. They talk about exhaustion more vividly than firefights. A man can forget the exact village he fought in, but he never forgets the feeling of his head dropping forward, eyelids heavy as lead, while the snow whispered a lullaby of death. One soldier remembers biting so deep into a comrade's arm that he drew blood. He tells it with a laugh, but his voice trembles, and you see the way his eyes drift away, replaying the scene. Another swears the pills gave him the strength to march for 3 days straight, but ruined his heart for life. He presses a hand to his chest and shakes his head as if the beat inside is still irregular. The memories don't fade, they shift. What once felt like humiliation becomes a strange badge of honor. Men roll up sleeves decades later to show faded scars, faint semicircles of teeth still imprinted on skin. They joke about it to grandchildren. See this. Your grandpa was too stubborn to fall asleep. The kids giggle, imagining it all as a game. But behind the smile lies something heavier, proof of how survival carved itself into flesh. Historians interview these men, notebooks open, pens scratching. Some veterans downplay the stories, embarrassed to admit they once resorted to such primitive acts. Others lean into the absurdity, telling tales with wide gestures, earning laughter from their audience. The scholars try to piece together the truth, weighing exaggeration against silence. Did whole companies bite each other awake, or only a desperate handful? The evidence is fragmentary, but the consistency is hard to ignore. And yet, even among veterans, debate lingers. Some insist the biting saved lives. Without it, one man mutters, half of us would have frozen before dawn. Others dismiss it as soldier folklore, exaggerated by memory, a story that grew with each retelling. The arguments echo in taverns, over beers, across decades. You realize the war itself may end, but the questions never do. For you, though, the truth is simple. The memories are etched into your body and your mind. You remember the sting, the laughter, the gratitude. You remember how fatigue felt like the fiercest enemy, how comradeship was measured in teeth marks rather than medals. Those memories live sharper than the battles, because battles ended, fatigue never did. In some ways, you carry the war more in your exhaustion than in your scars. Long after peace returns, you find yourself jerking awake at night, convinced you've dozed on guard duty. You still stamp your feet on cold mornings, even in civilian boots, as though waiting for frostbite to creep in. You still startle at snores, hearing them not as harmless noise, but as echoes of barracks filled with restless, broken men. There's a strange comfort in knowing you're not alone in this. Veterans nod knowingly when the subject comes up, their eyes clouded with the same sleepless memories. It becomes a shared language, the bond of fatigue. No outsiders can truly understand it, no matter how carefully you explain. The absurd details, the frozen socks, the phantom rabbits, the biting sound like comedy to those who weren't there. But to you and to those who lived it, they're threads of survival woven into every breath. Historians still debate whether exhaustion shaped the war more than strategy. Did fatigue dull the German edge? Did sleeplessness tip the balance towards Soviet endurance? Some argue yes, that exhaustion weakened entire divisions, slowing marches, eroding morale. Others insist the grand tides of the war were too vast to be swayed by weary eyelids. The arguments circle endlessly, unresolved. But when you close your eyes, you don't think of maps or strategy. You think of how it felt to nearly collapse in the snow, saved only by the sting of a comrade's teeth. In the end, perhaps the truth doesn't lie in statistics or strategy at all. Perhaps it lies in the personal, the bruises, the laughter, the absurd rituals that made the difference between life and death. You survived, not because of grand plans, but because of little acts of defiance against sleep. And when you remember the war, it's those small acts that echo loudest. You glance down at your arm, even now, decades later. The bruise has long faded, but in your mind, the mark is still there. You smile faintly, shaking your head at the absurdity of it all. The world may never understand, but you do. Survival has its own strange language, and sometimes it is spoken in teeth. In the end, all the odd rituals, the biting, the stamping, the singing of nonsense songs were never about madness, though outsiders might have thought so. They were about survival, plain and simple. You realize that now, sitting in the quiet aftermath of it all. remembering the way exhaustion pressed harder than artillery, colder than frostbite, more relentless than any enemy soldier. Why did German soldiers bite each other to stay awake in the cold? Because there was no other choice. Sleep in that winter landscape meant surrendering your life to the snow, and no soldier wanted to be remembered as the one who froze with a rifle in his lap. Pain, however small, was preferable to that. And so you and your comrades turned teeth into tools, humor into medicine, rituals into lifelines. Looking back, you understand it wasn't madness, it was adaptation. War strips men of dignity, but it also forces them to improvise. When the human body falters, the human mind invents. Sometimes the inventions are crude, absurd, even humiliating, but they work. And in the frozen trenches of the Eastern Front, working meant living. The marks faded over time, but the memory remained. You remember the sharp sting, the laughter that followed, the quiet nod of gratitude. You remember watching comrades slump forward, only to be snapped awake by a nip on the wrist. You remember the surreal camaraderie of men comparing bite marks in daylight, joking about nicknames like bulldog and mosquito. You remember the way humor and pain blended into something stronger than either. Historians will continue to argue about it, long after you're gone. Was it widespread or rare? Was it true survival or just a soldier's tall tale? Did it symbolize the breakdown of discipline or the ultimate proof of ingenuity? The questions circle endlessly. But for you, the truth doesn't live in archives or debates. It lives in the trenches, in the bruises, in the faint scars hidden beneath sleeves. It also lives in the echoes that followed you long after the war. You carried it home, tucked into your habits. You found yourself stamping your feet on cold mornings, even in civilian shoes. You jerked awake at night, heart racing, convinced for a moment that you'd nodded off on guard duty. You startled at the sound of snoring, hearing it not as a harmless domestic noise, but as a reminder of crowded barracks filled with men too restless to rest. The war ended, but fatigue never truly left. And yet, despite the strangeness, despite the scars, you don't see it as shame. You see it as testimony to the stubbornness of survival. The war demanded more than weapons and strategy. It demanded creativity, absurdity, and the willingness to endure indignity for another breath, another dawn. That, in the end, is why you lived. Perhaps that's the answer to the question. Why did German soldiers bite each other to stay awake in the cold? Because survival doesn't always look noble. Sometimes it looks ridiculous. Sometimes it looks desperate. But it is always human. And as you close your eyes now, remembering the frostbitten nights, the phantom rabbits, the endless laughter, you feel a strange kind of pride. Not pride in the war, not pride in the cause, but pride in endurance itself. You endured, you adapted, you lived, and now, as our journey drifts to a close, let the sharp edges soften. You've walked through the frostbitten trenches, felt the sting of teeth, heard the laughter that rose in the darkest nights. You've carried the weight of exhaustion, heavy as iron, and you've seen how men fought it with absurd courage. Not with grand victories, not with shining medals, but with small, stubborn axe bites, jokes, dances in the snow. Let those images fade now, like snow melting under a spring sun. Imagine the trench walls dissolving into mist, the bruises fading from your skin, the cold easing its grip. The war is behind you. The night is gentler here. You are no longer the weary sentry stamping his feet against frostbite. You are safe, warm, and still. Take a slow breath, then another. Picture yourself lying in a quiet field, the ground soft, the air calm. Above you, Stars shimmer, not as threats, but as companions. The silence is no longer heavy, it is peaceful. Every sound is distant, softened, as though the world itself has decided to let you rest. Feel your body loosen, your shoulders uncoil, your jaw unclench. The weight you carried in those endless nights slides away. What remains is only calm, only warmth, only the steady rhythm of your breath. You have walked far tonight. You've endured the cold, the hunger, the strangeness of survival. And now you can let it all go. The story is told. The night is yours. Sleep, at last, is no enemy, is a friend waiting patiently. Close your eyes, drift gently, and rest easy. You are safe. You are warm. You are home.